Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's CLE. I'd like to introduce our presenter, Michael Cermak. Uh, Mike is going to be going over everything that you need to know, or at least a good overview of things that you should be aware of to make your business and your files more secure. And we thank him for presenting that today for the Franklin County Bar Association. Please use the chat feature to ask questions. And we will have some time at the end of today's presentation to answer other questions that you have. As a reminder, we will be taking attendance polling using the Zoom polling feature. So please look for that and make sure you answer it so you get your CLE credits. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming to learn about cybersecurity. It's something I'm pretty excited about, but I know that isn't shared by everyone. We're going to get into some things that are a little bit more technical and some things that maybe you already know, but hopefully you'll find something useful. First thing is Microsoft, Estee Lauder, Marriott, Wawa. What do they all have in common? You probably already guessed it. They all had major data breaches last year. They also probably have a slightly higher IT budget than any of us have. So if they can't get this right, how can we as a small organization? But there are a lot of best practices that are out there that you should be doing to help reduce your risk. Today, I'm going to talk about 9 kind of overview things that you should at least be aware of, even if you don't implement everything right away, just to understand what's going on in the IT world. First of all, you are a target. Don't have the misconception that you're not. The internet was not designed to be secure, so there's things we need to do to try to make it secure. You want to keep your Wi-Fi secure. Ransomware is even more dangerous than you think it is. Email was never designed to be secure, and we'll talk about some scams with that, and also email encryption. Use the principle of least privilege, which is basically having people on a need-to-know basis. Don't give people access to everything if they don't need that for their job. Your password is not good enough. We'll talk about password security, which people get tired of hearing about, but also password managers and multi-factor authentication. Keeping software up to date seems obvious, and also don't use end-of-life software. And finally, the most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is keeping your stuff backed up. Data that isn't backed up is data that isn't important. And there's probably some data you're not backing up that we may want to consider. So we'll start off. You are a target. It can happen to you. I talk to people all the time who think, the hackers are going against the Microsofts and the Wawas and the Adobes and all these big companies. They're not going to waste their time on me. But it's simply not true for a lot of reasons. First of all, small companies are usually the easier targets. But also, a lot of these attacks are not targeted to you anyway. A lot of attacks are untargeted, and they just go up against as many computers as they can hit. They don't care if it's yours or your neighbors or whatever. And anyway, as an attorney, maybe you or your clients have some enemies, maybe. So maybe you are targeted for some of these attacks. The reason we do computer security the way we do is we try to do layers. And one weak link in your security can mean someone can get in. It doesn't matter, how many firewalls you have up front and you have antivirus that's up to date. But if you have some backdoor that's left open that people can get around that, regardless of what sort of security you have up front, then that's the issue. That's the weakest link. And more often than not, that's the human factor. That's, a bad guy trying to trick your staff into clicking a link or downloading a program or calling and pretending to be your Xerox vendor or whatever. More often than not, that's the way they're getting in, and it completely bypasses all that other security you think you had in place up front. We think of them as layers. So for the example of the castle, we have the royals in the middle that we're trying to protect. Around them, we have the guards and the walls and the moat. And hopefully the idea is that even if you get past one of those levels of security, you'll be prevented from getting into the critical part in the middle somewhere along the line. Same thing applies for computer security. If you have your data in the center, we don't want the bad guys to get to that. We hopefully have physical security, like a lock on the door where your server is. We have good passwords, and we'll be talking about that. A firewall that's properly set up, antivirus, all these other things. And even if there are holes in some of those layers, and there are, whether or not you realize it, there's some hole in some of those layers, but hopefully there's enough of them that they don't line up to allow me to get into it. As I mentioned, there's 2 main types of attacks. We've got targeted attacks, which is where someone's specifically trying to go over after you or your organization. Those are the scariest kind because They're actively trying to figure out what your organization is vulnerable to, how they can trick your staff, how they can create an email address that looks like one that they would trust, how they can do something like that. And they're often the most difficult to prevent, which is why training like this and similar ones for your staff are important. But also untargeted, which are far more common. That's usually what we see. And it's just indiscriminate attacks. They send out millions of emails knowing that only a small percent of people will fall for it, but it doesn't matter because what's the cost of sending millions of emails? And also, every month Microsoft releases security updates. And if you're a bad guy, you can look at that and say, oh, well, here's what they're fixing. And not everyone has installed the update yet. And it's relatively simple to write a program that just searches the internet, trying to find any computer that is still vulnerable to that problem and attack it automatically. And again, they don't care if that's your computer or someone else's. They're just trying to infect as many computers as they can. So in the end, untargeted is much more common, but either one can be just as devastating to an organization, whether or not it was targeted or untargeted. If it's a successful attack, that's all that really matters. The internet was not designed to be secure. I want to talk about VPNs and encryption. Originally, when the internet was created, nothing was sent encrypted over the internet. Everything was plain text. Everything was clear text. So if you were listening in between, if you had connected to the network, I could see all the information being transmitted back and forth and read everything. I could see the messages, the usernames, the passwords, everything, credit card numbers before we had good encryption on the internet. I have a program on my computer called Wireshark, and that's what it does. I can plug it in or connect to your wireless network and watch traffic moving back and forth across your network and up to the internet and see what's happening. And if that isn't encrypted, then I can read it. I can read the passwords, I can read the files, I can read all of that if it's not encrypted. This was really well shown. There's a convention of IT security people every year in Las Vegas called DEF CON. And this is pictures from about 2016. And they had a projector on the screen there called the Wall of Sheep. What they did is, like most conventions, they had open Wi-Fi there. You could go there, connect to the internet, be able to do your browsing. But if you were using a site that wasn't encrypted, it would be added to this list of Wall of Sheep. And it's a little hard to see on here, but it has all these usernames and email addresses and their passwords because it wasn't encrypted. So it's super easy to be able to see those. They were kind enough here to redact part of the passwords before they put them on the projector. But it was devastating, especially to IT people, to see their email address and part of their password up there and realize how important this was. Today, it's much harder to do something like this because almost every website uses some form of encryption, almost. But it's worth checking with your IT person, especially in the case of email. I'm surprised how often I still find computers that check their email through an unencrypted connection. So that is something to still consider. But by and large, you see this, right? And you've probably heard this before. Whenever you're using the internet and browsing websites, you see these little locks next to the web address, lets you know that it's an encrypted connection to that site. But that's all that means. All it means is that the information that I type into my computer here, if I go to Amazon, I see that little lock, it's encrypted. I can type in my credit card number and I know that it gets encrypted on my computer here. It goes through the internet and Amazon decrypts it. Anyone who sees that information in between just sees gibberish. It's like the Enigma machine in World War II. It just jumbles it up. You have to have the key on the other side to be able to read it. And the encryption these days is really good. It's that part isn't an issue. But the thing that is important to remember that people get confused about is all that lock means is that the information is encrypted while it's being transmitted over the internet. It doesn't mean that the website is trustworthy. It doesn't mean that it's not a scammer's website. All it means is that the information you're typing in is getting encrypted before it goes out over the internet. And you can have a secure, encrypted, private connection to a scammer's website. So that's the important thing to keep in mind on this. So I'll show you an example here. This is a PayPal login screen, looks like any other PayPal login screen. We've got the PayPal logo here. Look a little closer up here. We've got the lock. It's an encrypted connection. It even says paypal.com. But in fact, the website I'm looking at is paypal.com.security.alert.confirmationmanagersecurity.com. Someone went to the trouble of getting the web address confirmationmanagersecurity.com, and they're using it just to trick people. It's just a scammer's website. They want you to type in your email address, type in your PayPal password so that they can have access to your PayPal account. And unless you know to look for this, and if you're actually paying attention, it's really easy to fall for these. I mean, it looks like a real site. It has an encrypted, green lock on it that a lot of people who don't know better interpret that as a secure, safe website. So it's a very difficult attack to prevent right now. It's something people need to be looking out for. Speaking of encryption, I want to take a minute here to talk about VPNs, because that's something a lot of people are confused about. I get a lot of questions about. A VPN is a virtual private network, and effectively what it is a private tunnel that goes through the internet between your computer and a VPN server. The most common use for this for years and years was to have your office over on this side that had a VPN server on it. Your computer could be at home or at a hotel or wherever, but when it connected over the internet to the VPN server, all of that information transferring between those 2 points is encrypted. So it doesn't matter if you're transferring sensitive files in between there or credit cards that aren't encrypted or whatever. If it's inside that VPN tunnel, it's encrypted and people can't see it. And it's a great way to be able to work remotely by doing that. It's a secure way to do it. Today, there's another type of VPN that's generally called a personal VPN service. And they're advertised everywhere. It's kind of one of my pet peeves because they tend to advertise, you know how marketing people are, right? They make more claims than are true. What these claim to do is add additional privacy and security to your web browsing. They tell you to subscribe to this VPN service, connect to it whenever you're using the internet, especially if you're on a public Wi-Fi access point, and that it'll keep all of your information secure as it's transmitted over the internet. And like most marketing, there's bits and pieces of that that's true and not true. So what you have is your computer here that's connected through a secure VPN tunnel to the VPN provider somewhere out in the world. But then from there, whatever information you're transmitting through here leaves your VPN server and goes out to the internet, where you're connecting to Facebook or Amazon or Netflix or whatever you're doing. So the important part here is that that connection between the VPN server and whatever website you're using is still just as encrypted or not encrypted as it would have been to begin with, whether or not you're using this VPN in between. So the claims that it makes your banking more secure or that it makes you less likely to get a virus or anything like that are just not true. The thing that it does do is it kind of pushes the problem down the road a little bit. So one of the problems this does correctly try to attack or try to help is there are ISPs, your internet provider, Comcast or CenturyLink or whoever you have for internet, they can see what website you're going to. If it's an encrypted website, if it has that lock on it, they can't see what information is being transmitted. They can't see your password or your bank balance or what Netflix movie you're watching, but they can see you're looking at Netflix or you're looking at a particular bank. And some ISPs use that to collect information about you and sell that to advertisers. People don't like that for privacy reasons. So VPNs will help with that. If you create a VPN connection to another server, your internet provider in between here can't see where you're going. They can see you're on a VPN, but they can't tell you what you're doing in it. But then it just moves the problem further down the road because the VPN server can still see everything you're doing. And if you don't have a secure VPN server, then there have been VPN servers that do the same thing. They collect all the information of all the websites you go to, and they sell those to advertisers. In fact, there's a lot of VPN services available for free. And as the saying goes, if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. It's just like on Facebook, you don't pay for Facebook because they're selling you to the advertisers. The same thing with these free VPN services. So I'm not a huge fan of them. There are some legitimate uses for them. If you're in a college and you don't want the higher ups to be able to see what websites you're surfing to, a VPN will help that privacy there. If you're in a country that limits certain access to websites, that will help. For example, I have friends who are in the military and overseas. And if you're overseas, there are certain websites you can't get to, or if you go to Netflix, there are certain movies you can't watch. But if you use a VPN server, as far as Netflix can tell, or any other website you're visiting, you're connecting from that VPN server. So if that server's in the US, they think you're in the US, regardless of the secure pipe that's taking you over to wherever you really are. So those are some of the legitimate uses for it, but it's not really going to make your web surfing any more secure. It's not going to make your banking any more secure. It will help a little bit with local privacy. Hopefully that helps. And feel free to ask questions in the chat or at the end. I know this is an area that I get a lot of questions about. So keep your Wi-Fi secure. This seems like an obvious one, but there's a couple tips here. When you're connecting to Wi-Fi at your office or at your home, you want to be using encrypted Wi-Fi. And again, it's just this little lock. Whenever you're connecting to your Wi-Fi at home or at work, you should see that little lock telling you it's an encrypted connection. When you're somewhere else and you're using a guest network, very often it's not encrypted. So that's again where it's even more important that you see that lock on the website. But whenever you're at home or at work and you have that password on your Wi-Fi, you need to protect that password like you would other passwords. You only want people on your network who you trust. So your employees and other people who need to be on the network should have the password. But everyone who walks in the door and says, hey, can I borrow your internet, or I'm here for a meeting, or opposing counsel, or whatever, don't give them the password to your network, because that's one more of those layers that you're just allowing them to walk right through. If I have the password to your Wi-Fi network, whether you read it to me or you type it in yourself and it's now saved on my computer, I can then look at how many computers you have on the network. Do you actually have passwords on all those computers? I can run a program to try to attack those passwords, see if you've good passwords on there. And worst of all, I don't even have to be there to do it right then. I come in there for a meeting, you hook me up to the Wi-Fi so I can surf the internet, and then I come back that night and sit in the parking lot and connect to the Wi-Fi and take as long as I need to try to attack it. The better thing, instead of letting them in your private network, is to have a separate guest network. And that's what you see whenever you're out and about, right? And at Starbucks, you're not connecting to the Starbucks network where their cash register is. You're connecting to some guest network that's completely separate. And there's technical ways to separate them called VLANs. I'm not going to get into all of that, but ask your IT person. And the important part is, if I'm connected to your guest network, I shouldn't be able to even see anything about your private network or see that those computers exist. It should be completely logically separate, so that I'm not able to try and attack you that way. Ransomware is even more dangerous than you think. Ransomware is a really scary thing. We were talking about encryption. Ransomware is where encryption is used for bad instead of good. What that is if I trick you into running a program on your computer or someone else's computer on your network, and then I can infect the other computers on your network, I go in there and have this program that automatically encrypts all of your files. You can't open any of your documents, any of your spreadsheets, anything. They're all locked. They look kind of like what you see over here. Instead of being Word documents or Excel documents or all these plain files that you can't open, they're encrypted. And you get a nice little love note here saying, oh, all your files are encrypted. Send me some Bitcoin and I'll send you the key to be able to get to your files again. And by the way, you've got several hours to do it in, or I'm just going to delete all of your files. And this happens all the time. I'm sure you've heard of ransomware before. It happens to huge companies. There's been several huge ransomware types of attacks out there. Back in 2017 was one of the first really big ones that was called WannaCry. And the WannaCry attack hit companies like Boeing, FedEx, Honda, and hit them in big ways that all of a sudden they couldn't use their computers. One of the scariest things, though, was over in the UK, the NHS, the National Health Service, they had computers that were also infected by WannaCry. And it shut down hospitals effectively. There were ambulances that had to be diverted from one hospital to another because there were no working computers. There was 70,000 computers, MRI scanners, other medical equipment that couldn't be used during the attack. And there were operations they had to cancel. It was a big deal for this to happen. And then just last year in 2020, in Germany, there was another ransomware attack where they believe it was the first case of someone dying as the result of a ransomware attack, that a patient had to be moved from one hospital to another because the hospital's computers were down, and he died, and they're investigating it as negligent homicide. And it's a whole different level when you think about computer viruses and infecting things like that. So you can imagine, as devastating as it is for something like that, even if it happens on your level, and we see these all the time where people get ransomware attacks on their computers and all of a sudden all of their files are gone, it can really cripple your operation. So what do you do if that happens? First of all, don't pay the ransom, because there's no guarantee that they're actually going to send you the key to get to your oh, I see they're doing the poll here shortly for your CLE. Make sure you respond to that. So don't pay the ransom though, because there's no guarantee they're actually going to send you the key to get to your files. And you're encouraging the hackers. You're encouraging them to continue to do what they're doing. And another option you have though is there's a website by some good guys that I'm showing here. It's called No More Ransom. And on No More Ransom, they have many, but not all of the ransomware keys out there. So there's hundreds and hundreds of different ransomware attacks, but many of them use the same keys to encrypt your files. So there's this website that if you do get hit, there's a chance you might be able to, for free, get one of the keys that will open up your files. It's worth a shot. And of course, the worst case scenario in the end is to use backups, restore all of your data from backups, because you have backups, right? We're going to talk about that too. The top causes of ransomware, even better than trying to solve ransomware after it happens, is to prevent it. And the top causes of ransomware, the top vectors that they get into your computer, there's three main ones. The first one is your remote desktop protocol, and I'm going to talk about that in detail here in a moment. The second one is email phishing, and that's where they send you an email, try and trick you into clicking a link to run the program and install ransomware that way. And the third one is just general software vulnerabilities. I mentioned the WannaCry virus at NHS and all these other companies. What's fascinating to me about that, or terrifying about it, is Microsoft discovered this issue that caused WannaCry in March of 2017 and released updates to prevent it. But these big attacks like the NHS attack weren't until May of 2017, months later. So within those couple of months, they just hadn't installed the update to prevent that type of attack. And that's why software updates is really important. But the number one cause of ransomware is remote desktop protocol. And that's a particular program that's on every Windows computer. And it is a software vulnerability, but it's so bad that it gets its own category to be number one on the list. So remote desktop protocol, which is often called remote desktop connection, is a program that's designed to let you remotely control a computer. So I can sit at my computer here, connect to another computer in my office, control the keyboard and mouse and see the screen and do all that. And it's great for that, but people started using it over the internet and the encryption on it was not very good. So in order to use it over the internet, that also allows other people to potentially connect into it. There's better alternatives to remote desktop connection. For example, a lot of people use LogMeIn, Splashtop, TeamViewer, GoToMyPC. If you need remote access to your computers, these are my preferred ways of doing it instead of remote desktop. Any one of these, of course, if you make your password, then it isn't necessarily any more secure. But in general, these are better choices than remote desktop. The problem is, in order to use remote desktop from another location, if I have a computer in my office I want to connect to from home, I have to open a port in my firewall. The firewall is the device that protects you from the internet. And if you want to allow people to connect to remote desktop, you open a port that allows that specific type of connection in. And anytime you're opening a port in your firewall, it's potentially a problem. There's legitimate reasons to do it. For example, if you're running your own email server, like an Exchange server, you need to do that. But you want to do it as infrequently as possible. Every hole you poke in that firewall is another potential way for someone to attack. And remote desktop is really well known for people being able to attack through it. You should never open a firewall, you should never open a port in the firewall for remote desktop. Period. End of sentence. You should just never do it. We had a customer in Chambersburg recently. It was a retail location, and their software vendor was determined that they needed to keep that remote desktop protocol open on the firewall. And we convinced them eventually, because we pointed out in the PCI compliance rules that they need to do for credit cards, it specifically says you can't have a port open on your firewall for remote desktop. It's in there. So we convinced them finally to go to something more secure. But I still run into this all the time. And it's become a joke among IT people. You see memes like this. I see you like to leave RDP open on the internet. I too like to live dangerously. Like that's a joke among IT people. Or Mr. Garrison, open RDP ports on the internet are bad, okay? And this is not the sort of thing you'd probably even realize that is happening, but it's that bad. It's, if you have that on your system and don't realize it, it can be really dangerous. Another alternative, if you are using remote desktop over the internet, is just to do it over a VPN connection. We just talked about VPNs, and that anything that goes through that VPN is encrypted. So if you're working from home and using remote desktop to get to your office, if you're connecting to the VPN first to be able to do it, then you're fine. But if you're connecting to remote desktop directly without some sort of security first, then I would be a little bit concerned, and I'd probably suggest looking at some alternatives. Email. Email is not secure. All of this bad news, nothing is secure. Originally, when email was designed, no one imagined it would be used the way it is today. No one tried to make it secure. Just like the websites, nothing had encryption on it. Email, now we're slowly adding different things to try to force it to be secure, to try to get rid of spam, to try to eliminate email spoofing. And encryption is one of those things. Depending on what email system you're using, it may be very simple to send an email encrypted, right? In Office 365, depending on which package you have, there's literally an encrypt button up here under options that you can use. Other service providers, other email systems have similar ways where you can send encrypted or secured emails to other people. And if you're sending it to someone who's on the same system, if they're in your office and using the same email system, it's nothing for them to read that encrypted email. It's often done for them automatically. It shows a little lock on there, but otherwise they might not even know it. The problem is people who are using other email systems, and you've already dealt with this, I'm sure. You've seen encrypted emails come in, it kind of looks like this. I've got a secure email, click this link to read it, or maybe like this, or maybe like that, or maybe like this. And they all kind of look the same thing, but it's a hassle because then it's another step, right? I get this message, I have a secure email, I need to click the link and go log in and be able to read the email. There's not a great solution to that yet. It's the best thing we have right now for secured email to be able to do encryption between different types of email systems. And it's better than nothing, but it introduces more problems. So if I get this message that I've received a secured email, all I have to do is click that button and log in, right? I get my Microsoft login or whatever email provider you're using. But wait, let's look carefully again. Up here, we've got our lock, but I can assure you that Microsoft's login is not at moderndandy.com. I don't know what Modern Dandy is, but it's not Microsoft. It's another website that's just trying to trick you into giving them your credentials. So again, all I have to do is fake an email, send it to you, maybe from someone you're expecting an email from, say it's an encrypted email, you click the link and log in without thinking about it. I mean, it's just instinct, especially if you're in a rush to do something. And it's not just Microsoft. I just pick on them because they're what most of our customers use. Same thing with Google. Here's another fake Google login page. This one doesn't even have the lock on it, but it's another page just designed to trick you into giving them your credentials. Here's another email, and we've all seen these, but it's worth pointing out for a couple of reasons. I have this email. I literally got this message from FedEx, and it's from shipments@fedex.com. I know it's a little hard to read up on the slide there. Track your shipment with a tracking number on it. Dear customer, that's a little generic, but whatever. And has a shipping number. And down here, the link that I'm supposed to go to, fedex.com/apps.whatever. I mean, that's fedex.com. That looks like a legit site. The one thing that did stick out in my mind a little bit when I read this is they're saying that I owe them $4.50 for a package to get delivered. Kind of interesting the way they wrote that, 04.5 USD, not exactly the common way here in the US we would write that. But what's important to know is if you put your mouse on top of a link, whether it's on the internet or on your email, just hover over it without clicking on it. It'll pop up a little message like this showing you where that actually goes. So whether it says click here or whether they typed in fedex.com, they can make that go wherever they want when you click on it, wherever they want you to go. So in fact, when I click on fedex.com here, it's not taking me to fedex.com. It's taking me to bit.do/EK7AZ, some scammer's website, right? Where they're going to say, this is FedEx, enter your credit card number to pay your $4 so we can deliver your package. But they're just taking my credit card number. It's another easy scam to do, but people fall for it all the time because they see this part. They see fedex.com. It must be the real website, but it's not. When you're clicking on it, it can go somewhere entirely different than whatever they put there. People fall for these type of email scams all the time. I love Shark Tank. I love Barbara. And some of her staff fell for one of these scams, and she lost almost $400,000 to it. There was someone who sent an email seemingly from her assistant to her bookkeeper saying, here's an invoice that needs paid. How often does that happen? Probably every day. And they just paid $400,000 off of it before they realized it was a scam. Google and Facebook combined were tricked out of $123 million by these type of scams. There was one guy in Lithuania who created fake invoices with fake email addresses that he sent to Google and Facebook, and they fell for it over and over and over again to the tune of $123 million before they realized it. So it's easy to fall for these. Even people who should know better are falling for it. And the problem is that the email system is just not secure. It's super easy to change what it looks like, what my name is, what my email address is whenever I'm sending a message. I use the comparison of sending a piece of mail through the postal service. I can put whatever I want on that return address. No one is checking to see if it's actually coming from that return address. And it's the same thing in the email system. I can literally go in here, change my name, change my email address, say that it's being sent from Elon Musk. No one is checking. It's being sent out. It says when you receive the email, it'll say that name, say that email address. It doesn't matter. And that's what happened with Barbara, with something very similar. They actually created a fake email address that looked very similar to her assistant's email. It said that, as it turned out, Emily never sent the invoice. The phony bill came from an email that closely resembled hers, but it was missing a letter O. Cochran's team didn't realize that something was off until in the from email, until after the money had already been transferred. So that happens all the time when it's targeted, especially we see that where sometimes they'll create an email address that looks just like one you know, but maybe it's a 0 instead of an O, or some other character is just a little bit off that you might not notice. But it can be the actual real email address. I can change it to be that. The other thing that you can do, there's a field here called reply to address. So if I send you an email, it looks like it's coming from Elon Musk and you reply to it, you might think it's going to go to Elon Musk, but I can put a reply to address in there that when you hit that reply button, it changes where that message is going back to. It'll show it to you. When you hit reply, it shows you what address it's going to, but most people don't notice that. They don't know that that's even a thing that's in there. And another option, of course, if I want to scam someone, send an email from someone else, is if I get control of the email account that I want to send from, then it's super easy. It can actually legitimately come from Elon Musk. If I if I somehow hack into his account, right, I trick him to go to one of these websites where he types in his email address and password, I can log into his email, I can send emails as him, I can delete those emails out of his sent box so he doesn't know it happened. I can create rules in his inbox so that any messages coming back to those are directed to me and he never sees them. I have a lot of control then once I get into that. So a couple of things here to look for as red flags is look for fake email addresses or suspicious email addresses. Don't trust attachments. You already know that. Look for these real generic dear customers. Although if it's a targeted attack, it doesn't have to be generic. They can put your name in there. Oftentimes there's some sense of urgency. You have to pay right now. You have to log in right now. Look at this document right away. They don't want you to take a moment to think about what you're doing. They want you to click on it without thinking. And oftentimes there's little grammatical errors, or they'll write $4.50 in some unusual way, something that just doesn't feel quite right. And the big thing, before you click on a link, look at it real carefully. Put your mouse over top of it, see where it's actually going to send you. And in many cases, it's better off not to click the link at all, right? If I get a message from my bank saying I need to log in to look at something, more often than not, I can just go to the bank's website myself. Forget about the email, open up my browser, type in my bank's web address, log in directly. That way I don't have to trust that that link is going where I think it's going. And of course, the other thing is that if you have a really important email that you receive or something that looks suspicious or a bill for $400,000, maybe call first and verify, make sure that this really is a legitimate thing. Another thing I like to talk about is the principle of least privilege. And this is a simple concept, but something that is just worth taking a moment to look at your organization and see how it could be applied. You want to limit users to have access to whatever they need to have access to for their job, and not more than that. Very often, especially in smaller organizations, everyone has access to everything. But it's better practice to try to create groups so that these people have permission to get into the financial data, everyone else doesn't. These people have permission to get into these type of files, everyone else doesn't. And it's not so much a trust thing. Maybe I wouldn't have these employees here if I didn't trust them, right? But if their account becomes compromised, they get hacked, they get a virus, at least that limits where the bad guys can go as well. Likewise, everyone shouldn't be an administrator. If everyone is an administrator to everything, then I have access to everything. I hack into any one of those accounts and I get everything. Whenever you're creating a share on a server or on your computer, you're sharing a folder. This is the screen that pops up if you've never seen it when you share a folder. And people are lazy. They'll say, I want to share this with everyone. And literally that's an option you can put in there is whenever you are creating the share, you can say, I want to share it with everyone. And you never want to share everything with everyone, anything with everyone. The problem here is that if I connect to your network through Wi-Fi, for example, if you give me your Wi-Fi password and you have a share that's open to everyone, I got it. I'm into it. The better thing, if you're on a Windows network, very often you use what's called domain users. So instead of everyone, what you usually mean is all of the users that are on this network, everyone who is logged in, which is called a domain user. But it's even better to be more specific than that if you can. Instead of everyone, you can say all of the people who are in this group of people, all of the financial people, all of the whatever your different teams are. Is the more restrictive you can be, the better off you usually are. And again, there's that factor, the human factor. It's great to say that, but there's a balance between what's usable on a day-to-day basis. But at the very least, don't open it up to everyone. And another thing that especially larger organizations will do is not allow everyone to be able to install software on their computer. You have the software you have on there that has been decided that you need to have on there, but in order to install additional software, it pops up with a message that a manager or an IT person or other key individual can log in and approve installing a piece of software, but not just everyone can install software. And again, it's not so much a trust thing, although there is that. Not, someone could be malicious and intentionally installing some sort of remote access software that you don't know about. But more likely, they're going to accidentally download something and accidentally start installing something without realizing they've done it. So screens like this and extra limitations like that can be helpful there. And it doesn't just apply to computers. I had a customer who had a surveillance camera system, and the secretary had the software running on her computer so she could watch the front door from her desk, which was perfectly reasonable. But she was logged into the surveillance system as admin, which meant she had control over everything, and which could be used maliciously, right? If someone's logged as admin, I can go in there and delete footage or stop recording or whatever. What happened though is when she was done for the day, she hit this little stop button at the bottom, and not knowing that that stop button stopped the recording. So it wasn't anything malicious. It was just she had permission to do something she didn't even realize she was doing. And the more you can limit that, the better off you usually will be. And think about it in other things. Like I said, not just computers, surveillance systems, phone systems, copiers. There's all sorts of different ways you can look at that and look at ways you may be at risk and not even be considering it. One of my favorite things here, password. Your password is not good enough. And everyone is sick of hearing about passwords. Everyone knows the rules or have heard different versions of rules of passwords. We're going to talk about password managers and multi-factor authentication, which is sometimes called two-factor authentication. This is one of the rules that a lot of people have seen. I like it. It's a little bit funny. Passwords are like underwear. You want to change them regularly. You don't want to leave them on your desk, and you don't want to loan them to anyone. And that last one is, again, kind of goes into what we were talking about before, is keeping people separate. You shouldn't be loaning passwords to different people. Everyone in a perfect world, and this isn't always possible, should have their own login for each system. So if Sarah needs access to this computer, instead of using John's password, she should have her own account to it. That way, if her account gets hacked, we can more easily figure out what happened. It's easier to follow the logs to see who accessed what. If she ever leaves the organization, it's easier just to turn her login off without worrying about what other logins she may have had access to. It's just best practice to do that, not to loan them around. We had another customer who had a rule in there. It was a big organization, and we helped at a small branch. We were kind of the local IT department for the small branch, but they had a organization-wide rule that you had to have a password that was 12 characters long, and it had to have uppercase and lowercase, and it had to have symbols, and it had to be changed every 30 days. Every 30 days, you had to change your password, and they had a program so that it couldn't be any variation of a previous password. Whenever you changed it, they checked. So as a result, if you went into this building and looked under almost any mouse pad, you found a sticky note that had their current password on it, because humans can't remember like that. We can't remember dozens of different passwords. So they were trying to make things more secure, but we're making them less secure. And there's things we can do that are better than that. It's other things to think about also. You don't want to have your list of passwords in your file drawer of your desk or in your file cabinet behind you. First of all, it's not secure. People can copy it without you knowing. Also, if there's a fire, you can lose all of your passwords. Likewise, don't have it on your computer in a Word document or Excel document. Please don't have an icon on your desktop or somewhere easy to find called passwords. Like if I get into your computer, don't make it that easy for me, make it a little bit difficult, but Word and Excel are not safe places to put your password, even if you call it something boring like 2015 taxes. Someone can search for all documents that have the word password in it or Microsoft in it or whatever. The better thing to do is to use a program called a password manager. And that's what we're going to get into in a moment. And it's really the only secure way to handle passwords these days, because one of the #1 rules of passwords that you've probably also heard and probably don't follow is don't use the same password on more than one place. So every website that you go to should have a completely different password. And that's what you do, right? No, of course not. Nobody does that because you can't possibly remember all of those. That's why you need a password manager. And the reason we tell you to do that, the reason you should have a different password for every website is because websites are hacked all the time. Every week we see another big website that was hacked. There's a website called Have I Been Pwned? And I have the link in the notes that Amelia sent out. And it lets you put in your email address and see every time your email appears on one of these data breaches. So I put my email address in, and first one comes up here, Adobe in 2013, 153 million accounts were hacked. And in that data that was dumped out there are all the email address, password hints, passwords, and usernames. And I can go out there and download that file. I can download 153 million email addresses and the passwords they were using as of that moment in 2013 on Adobe. And I'll bet you some of those passwords still work on other websites. And that's what these bad guys do. And go in here, here's another one, Discuss in October 2017. My email address, password, and username was in that. Dropbox, nobody uses Dropbox, right? Mid 2012, all the passwords, email addresses in that. We've got Kickstarter, we got MyHeritage. I like the family tree stuff, email addresses and passwords in that. MyFitnessPal, I try to do something to be healthy. Look at this, 2018, email addresses, IP addresses, passwords, usernames. I mean, it's only, how many of them were there in this? 144 million? 144 million of them there. MySpace, I forgot I even had a MySpace account, but my email address is in that hacked database from 2008 with my email address, password, username in it. So these are out there all the time, and that's why it's so important, because I can download these. People are all the time trying to hack into other websites. I can try to log into your bank or into PayPal or into whatever. And if you're using the same password there as you used in one of these breaches, it's just too easy. And this is also, by the way, if you've ever gotten one of those emails saying, I've hacked into your computer, I have recordings of you looking at dirty websites. If you don't send me a Bitcoin, I'm going to share this with everybody just to prove to you that I'm real. Here's your password. This is how they're getting it. They're not really in your computer. They're not really recording you on your webcam. They really just downloaded one of these lists of people's email addresses and their passwords, and they're just sending out spam using that. So this is why we need password managers. And I don't care which one you use. There's a lot of good ones out there. 1Password, Dashlane, LastPass are probably my favorite. But this is critically important. The way it works is that you only have to worry about one password. That's why they call it 1Password and LastPass. You have a master password that you use to be able to unlock all of your other passwords. And the program, the password manager, automatically puts that password in whenever you visit a website. I go to my bank's website, 1Password pops up, I hit yes, and it logs into the bank for me. I don't even have to know what the password is for the bank, and I shouldn't know. That's part of it. It should be something completely different than every other password I've ever used. So the saying goes that if you know what the password is for a website, you're probably doing it wrong. You shouldn't be able to even memorize them. And you can go in here, you can see all of your different passwords. The best thing is that it will even create passwords for you. So the first time I go in and sign up for a new website, or when I change my password at a website, LastPass or whichever program you're using will pop up here and it'll generate a password for you. Look at this, D4DX1, it's just gibberish. I don't care. I don't need to know what the password is. The password manager does it. And it synchronizes it between my devices. So I also have my passwords on my phone or tablet, and it does it in a secure, encrypted way. Right now, that's the best way to keep track of your passwords. And of all the things I'm going to talk about today, that's one of the most critical ones. So make a note of that. Check out a password manager. They all have free trials. It's incredibly important. For really important accounts like your email account, we need to go even further. There's another step called multi-factor authentication, or MFA. A lot of people call this two-factor authentication. And you're already using this and don't know it. You should be using it more perhaps, but The idea is that whenever you log into a website, instead of proving who you are just by a password, you also have to have some other factor to prove that it's you. So that if I trick you into giving me your password, I still can't get into your stuff. And the easy comparison is trying to get money out of an ATM. In order to get money out of the ATM, you have to have your PIN code, something you know, and you have to have your ATM card, something you have. And it's two factors. If you don't have one of those, you're not getting the money. And you see this all the time already. When you go to your bank, you log in for the first time on a computer to your bank. Very often they'll send you a text message saying, don't give this code to anybody, but type it into the website so we know it's really you. And then you enter your password. Same idea. It's something you know, your password, and something you have, your cell phone. And it's used in a lot of different systems now. It's a great way to add that extra level of security because it becomes exponentially more difficult for a hacker to get into your stuff if they don't also have your phone. It's not impossible, but it's exponentially more difficult. So it's a lot better than nothing. There are ways of getting around even that because hackers are very clever. There's something called SIM swapping where the bad guy calls AT&T or Verizon or whoever your cell phone provider is, and I say, yes, hey, it's Amelia, and I have this new cell phone. Can you move my account to this new cell phone? And AT&T and Verizon, being ever so helpful, does it and switches it over. And now every text message that would have gone to your phone now goes to the bad guy's phone. It's not a super common attack, but there have been some high profile cases where people have been attacked by using this. So it's something to be aware of. Again, if you're going to do two-factor authentication, and you should, and text message or SMS is the only way to do it, that's better than nothing. But just be aware it's not perfect. Nothing is perfect, right? That's why we have all these different layers. Other options for multi-factor authentication are hardware keys. I had one here, but I don't at the moment. But there's a popular one called YubiKey, and it works the same way. You go to log into a website, it asks you to stick your key in to verify that you have it, and then you type in your password. Something you have, which is the YubiKey, and something you know, which is your password. But my favorite one is a software authenticator. Oh, and it looks like we're going to get another poll here to make sure you guys are paying attention for your CLE credits. Where do you put the key? Great question. So with the YubiKeys, there's several different versions. The one they show here has a standard little USB plug. There's your poll. Make sure you answer it. There's a standard little USB plug. You just plug it into your computer like you would any other device and touch it. And that tells the website, yes, you have that key. But they also have versions of it that use USB-C for Mac and Apple computers. And they also have versions that work with mobile devices as well. It's a great option. My favorite option is software authenticators. There's Google Authenticator and Microsoft Authenticator and Authy, and there's several other ones out there. The way these work is the website will display a little QR code to you that you scan with that app, and they all work on Android and iOS. And then it generates a new number for you periodically. So this number that shows on your screen changes about every minute. And when you go to log into a website, it'll ask for this code, and then it'll ask for your password. And again, the idea is something you know, your password, and something you have. In this case, verifying your phone with an app that's on your phone. The nice thing about software authenticators is it doesn't automatically switch to a new phone whenever you get a new phone. So it's more secure than text message. Another thing to think about are all of the other devices that are on your network, especially firewalls and routers and things that are there for security. If you look at the back of most, especially home consumer grade firewalls, they're going to have a sticker like this that says the default access, username, admin, password, password. You don't need to be an IT security pro to know that that's not a great password and that you ought to change it. Most of them will force you to do it the first time you set it up, but not all of them do. And you'd be surprised how often I come into a location, go to log into their firewall, and the password is something like this, or is whatever the default password is that that manufacturer uses. And of course, there are websites for that, right? I can go to websites and say, all right, I'm looking at a 3Com whatever, or a Allen Tech, or whatever brand, a Xerox, and look up what the default passwords are for all of that equipment. You've got a Xerox Document Center 432, sure, default password admin 22222. Is it a big deal for copiers? Probably not, but for firewalls and important things like that, you definitely want to change it. And it's probably not a bad habit to do it for other things. There have been cases of people hacked through camera systems and through smart thermometers and all sorts of weird things. So it's a good habit to get into anyway. Finally, about passwords, what is a good password? Because we've been trained incorrectly. You have what you think is a good password here. This is troubadour with a symbol, with a number, and of course the symbol and number is always at the end, right? And we're getting really clever here though. Instead of an O, we've got a 0. Instead of a 4, we've got an A, because no one will ever think to do that. But people know this. These are the common tricks. I see Amelia actually laughing at that. Uh-oh, I might have some people I'm pointing out in the chat. But these are common tricks and people know this. And as a result, this is still a relatively short password. Computers are very fast. And if they can test your password thousands of times a second and just throw data at it, it's only a matter of time before they get into it. And with a password like this, it's relatively easy. They're guessing about 3 days to break into it. Meanwhile, it's a really difficult password for humans to remember. You know, was it trombone? Was it troubadour? Was one of them a 0? Was there a symbol at the end? We can't remember, but computers can figure it out. A better password is a longer password. And they give the example here of correct horse battery staple, just some random words, but it's going to take about 550 years for a computer to guess that. Meanwhile, it's a heck of a lot easier for a human to remember. The line here, though, is that through 20 years of effort, we've successfully trained everyone to use passwords that are hard for humans to remember, but easy for computers to guess. We've been training people completely wrong. And, you know, sure, it's good to have symbols in there. It's good to have uppercase. It's good to have numbers. My favorite type of password are the ones that are phrases that have some of that in it. Put some spaces in there, put a period at the end, something you can type in easily. Imagine how much easier it is to type in a phrase than to type in, you know, that gibberish. But it's a heck of a lot harder for a computer if it's a longer password. So final rules here on passwords: use a password manager, don't reuse your passwords, use multi-factor authentication, especially on your email, because if I get into your email, I can use forgot password all day long on every other website. And length usually trumps complexity when it comes to passwords. All right, two more things I want to get to. I know we're getting down toward the end. Appreciate you guys hanging out with me. The next thing is keeping software up to date. Seems obvious. Everyone already knows install your updates. One thing is to use software that is still getting updates. If you're still using a Windows 7 computer, you're doing it wrong. Windows 7 hasn't been supported in over a year. There's no security updates for it anymore. There's lots of viruses for it. And if you need to be PCI compliant or HIPAA compliant, you don't have a choice. You can't use Windows 7 anymore. It's just not supported. It's not secure. There's no updates for it anymore. Likewise, if you're using a computer that does get updates still, which you should, install the updates. It's no good to be running Windows 10 if you haven't installed an update in a year. And I know it's a pain. I know it hassles you. I know it always wants to restart in the middle of the work. Put it off, put it off, put it off, but do it eventually. You don't want to end up like the NHS where 3 months later they get attacked by something for which the update was released back in March. So make sure you're actually installing these updates once in a while. Go around to the computers, once a month. Just make sure that there's no updates waiting there, that it doesn't need a restart. Same thing with your antivirus. I know they're supposed to update automatically. You wouldn't believe how often I sit in front of a computer and discover that it hasn't installed any updates for the antivirus for the last year. It's stuck there. There's been an error. No one's gone in there and looked at it. Who thinks to look at their antivirus? And I don't care which antivirus you use. That's one of the common questions I get. What's the best antivirus? They're all so similar today. It's more personal preference than anything. They have an annual review of antiviruses where they put them against all these different types of viruses, figure out which ones are better than others at detecting certain ones. And there's a slight difference every year, 99.7% instead of 99.8%. It really doesn't matter. And Windows Defender, in my opinion, is just as good as using any of the others. Windows Defender, if you don't know, is the free one that comes with Windows. That's what I use on mine. But if you really like AVG, Norton, McAfee, Kaspersky, we got people who use all of those. That's fine. Use whatever you like, but only use one. We also get calls out to look at computers that are running slow, and we get there and they think they're being super secure because they've got Norton running and McAfee running and AVG running. And the problem with that is every time I open a file, it's got to pause the computer to be able to scan it by Norton. Norton says it's okay. Now McAfee's got to scan it, make sure that's okay. And that adds up over time. So pick one and keep it up to date and check it periodically. Now, my most important point, backups, backups, backups. It's so boring. No one wants to think about backups or talk about backups. They're critical. And because none of the things we talked about are 100%, there's always a chance something could happen. That's why backups are so critical. And it's not just for attacks, right? You could have a fire, you could have a hard drive fail, you could have a virus, you could have someone come in and steal the computers. There's lots of possibilities, and that's why backups become critical. You can do local backups, USB flash drives. They have external hard drives like the one on the screen there. And that was very popular for a while. We had a lot of customers use that before we switched many of them to cloud backups. The problem with local backups is you have to rotate them off site. If you're using an external hard drive like that, you should have more than one of them, keep one off site at all times, just in case the place burns down or you get a virus and that hard drive's plugged in. When you get a virus, a lot of good it does you. You won't need to keep something off site. The local school district down in Hagerstown here, Washington County, learned this the hard way recently. They had a server room that had a fire in it, and they had backups to that server in the server room. So as a result, they lost 22,000 grades for students down there. It never happened when I was in school. But they said through this experience, changes and fixes will be made to improve upon this backup. For example, we will have an on-premises and cloud-based backup solution. You got to have some data somewhere else because stuff like this happens. And there's pros and cons to both. We have pros and cons to cloud backups and to local backups. The cloud backups, obviously, like I said, if there's a fire, burglary, ransomware, but also it's more convenient. When you do the rotate the external hard drive offsite little dance, someone's in charge of doing that, but it becomes a hassle. And more often than not, I see people just get out of the habit of doing it and something happens and they realize, oh, that backup drive hasn't been rotated out for 6 months. It's like, nice thing with the cloud backups is you don't have to think about it. You should still check it periodically, but it's a lot less effort on the part of a human to do something. The biggest benefit to local backups is that they're faster. If you have a lot of data, if you have terabytes of data that you need to back up, it may take days or even weeks to send all of that up to the backup provider. I mean, likewise, whenever a terrible thing happens and you need to download all of it, it can take a long time to download it all. With a local backup, it's much, much faster to get to, but again, it's not secure from all of those other possible scenarios. So we have some people who like to do both. One thing I want to mention is if you know about RAID, it is not a backup solution. If you have a server, your server probably has RAID. What RAID is a redundant array of independent disks. The idea is that instead of having one hard drive in your server, you have multiple ones. So if one fails, all of your data is still safe. When you save information to a RAID, it's saved on both disks at the same time. So if one dies, you still have all of your information. And usually you don't even know it happened. Hopefully your IT guy is checking it periodically so they can swap out that dead one. But the idea is that when a hard drive dies, it doesn't take you offline. But people think of that as a backup solution, and it's not, because you get a virus and that virus will immediately be written to both hard drives. Or if you have a fire, obviously it's gone. Or if you have a burglary, it's not a backup solution. It's a good thing to have. It helps you in the one case of a hard drive failure, but nothing else. And one more thing is think about where your data exists in only one place, stuff that isn't being backed up that you typically don't think about backing up. We have a lot of data that's saved in OneDrive. I have emails and calendar items and tasks in Office 365. We have Google Drive, we have Dropbox. You probably have other cloud providers you use. How much do you trust each one of them? Because they're not usually responsible for your data in the case of a loss. Some of these companies could get hacked. Some of them could have hardware failures or other failures. Your data can get lost that way. I don't like having all of my eggs in one basket. Whether it's malicious or not malicious, an employee could delete files. Maybe I discover it within an undelete period of time. Maybe I don't. I like to have backups even of the stuff that I keep in the cloud. And there are companies out there who that's all they do. There are cloud backup solution providers, not just to back up the information that I have locally up into the cloud, but to back up from one cloud to another cloud. So different companies are holding my data and I don't have to worry about, again, all of my eggs in one basket. Another thought of data that's only in one place very often is overlooked data on a workstation. If you have a server and you have a rule that all the data has to be saved on the server, you might have that one employee who's saving stuff on their desktop or in their My Documents that isn't being synchronized to the server, and you want to find that out before it's too late. Maybe you need to install backup software on that server. Maybe you just need to convince that employee to save the stuff on the server where it will be backed up, but it's something you want to think about before it's too late. And my final thought here is checking things before it's too late. Test your backup system. Make sure that it's working the way you think it will. We had a attorney's office actually about 10 years ago. We started doing work for them when they discovered that their tape backup system hadn't been working in over a year. And of course, they discovered that when they needed it. That's not when you want to find out. So you want to go in there, every 6 months, whatever you're comfortable with, and try to restore a couple files. Pick a couple important files from a couple different places. Make sure you can pull them off of your backup. Make sure that they work the way you think they are. And also make sure that all of the files that you think are being backed up are actually selected to be backed up. That you don't have some files that exist just on one person's computer that doesn't have backup on it. Again, no way to eliminate all risks of a cyber attack, and that's why the most important thing is to have some kind of backup just in case. Whew, and that is the end. I know I threw a lot at you guys. I'm very happy to stick around for some questions. There's a poll that's popped up now. If you'll take a moment to answer that, I would appreciate it. Amelia would appreciate it. My contact information is also up on the screen. Feel free to contact me that way if you think of something later. If you want another copy of this, Amelia has it. I can send it to you as well. But I'm happy to answer any questions as well if anyone wants to throw anything in the chat or pop into the conference. And again, appreciate everyone coming out and listening, and hopefully you learned something new or gave you something else to think about that maybe you hadn't considered before.
Yes, I have a to-do list now.
I gave you some homework. I'm sorry. Better to do it in advance.
Absolutely. It was great information. It was a lot of information, but it was separated in a way that I can work through the whole PowerPoint and decide what I need to do.
Yeah, and in the document that Amelia sent out, the last 2 or 3 pages of that are some bulleted items and some URLs and some things like that that might be easier to swallow. Believe it or not, there's stuff I even left out. I know it's hard to imagine. It's such a dense and deep topic, and there's always more you can do. No matter what you do, there's always more you can do. But hopefully it gives you something to think about.
Well, we really appreciate you facilitating the CLE for us today. Attorneys have a lot to think about, and cybersecurity is probably not always the top priority, but this is really going to point everyone in the right direction. So thank you so much.
Sure, my pleasure.
And it looks like we have everyone responded to the poll. I want to thank everyone for attending our Zoom CLE today, and I'll be reporting your CLE credits, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Mike, thank you,
Have a good
Amelia.
weekend, everyone.